A Chinese reformer in exile documents the exile years of Kang Youwei, Imperial China's most famous reformer, and his organization, the Chinese Empire Reform Association. Kang sought to transform China's autocratic empire into a constitutional monarchy, similar to Great Britain or Japan, and to modernize China's military, education, industry, and government. Kang mobilized a large Chinese political movement based outside China with at least 100,000 members. The movement roused Chinese at home and abroad to care about their country's political future, and it united them to further their goals in a constructive way. It was China's first mass political party. We have identified 232 association chapters on 5 continents, with North America hosting 160 chapters in the US, Canada, and Mexico. North American chapters sponsored schools, newspapers, military academies, women's associations, and businesses. They helped fund and organize political pressure campaigns like boycotts and petitions that aimed to influence both the ruling Qing dynasty and foreign governments. These campaigns involved members across the world and sought to end the Chinese exclusion policy of the U.S., among other issues. Our book is based on Robert Worden's 1972 Georgetown University PhD dissertation. Joining Robert was a multinational team of historians to fill out the story of Kang and the Chinese Empire Reform Association in North America. We made use of previously unknown archival materials, including the Tom Leung collection at UCLA. We began collaborating on the book in 2011 with publication in January 2025. This picture was taken in 1905, about 10 years after Tom Leung and Kang Youwei first met, as student and teacher at Kang's alternative Confucian Academy in Guangzhou. Kang and his most famous disciple, Liang Qichao, taught Western thought, science, and math, along with a different kind of Confucianism, more or less interpreted by Kang to facilitate political reform. The school was named Wanmu Tang, or Thatched Hut Under 10,000 Trees, to evoke the idea of Kang cultivating a cadre of disciples. Kang built a lifelong bond with his students, who joined him to promote sweeping reforms in China. These students became the backbone of all of his future achievements. During the time that Tom was a student, between 1895 and 1898, Kang's political agenda was gaining traction in China. Kang had been memorializing the emperor about the need for reform, but only in 1895, when he organized a 3-day rally of imperial exam candidates in Beijing and gave rousing speeches describing his economic, educational, military, and political reform program, did his ideas draw serious consideration from both the emperor and the Chinese intelligentsia. Before long, Kang formed organizations of like-minded scholars to examine and promote reform ideas. They published newspapers, made speeches, and distributed leaflets, all new activities in the Chinese polity. These propaganda and organizational methods would allow Kang's exile reform organization to expand quickly after Kang fled China in September 1898. China at the time of Kang Youwei was ruled by the Manchus, a minority group who came from China's northeastern provinces in the region called Manchuria. The Manchus had routed the majority Han rulers of the Ming dynasty in 1644 and established the Qing dynasty, which would rule until the Chinese Empire met its end with the 1911 Republican Revolution. The Qing had expanded China's empire to its furthest reaches in history, and until the middle of the 19th century, China was virtually unchallenged by foreign powers. By 1895, however, China was besieged from within and without, after internal rebellion and disastrous losses to foreign powers in the Opium Wars, Sino-Japanese War, and Russian occupation of Manchuria. Not only had the antiquated Chinese military power failed to defend China, but the defeats brought enormous economic burdens in the form of indemnities levied by the foreign victors and the imposition of foreign treaty ports and concessions in the most prosperous cities in China, including Shanghai and Guangzhou. On top of all this was the humiliation of a once dominant civilization, which now seemed on the brink of perishing. Thus, China's leaders still justify their aggressive nationalism as payback for what they call the century of humiliation. The Guangxu Emperor began his reign as a 4-year-old, with his aunt, the Empress Dowager, as regent. At age 18, Guangxu took over the throne, and for 9 years took increasingly bold steps to bring forward new ideas for reforming and modernizing China. He even learned English, and sought knowledge far outside the classical education that his tutors could provide. Kang Youwei's books and memorials proposing specific reforms began to reach the emperor in 1895, and in the summer of 1898, Guangxu decided to launch what became known as the 100 Days of Reform, a radical program that was largely designed by Kang and a group of his disciples. Over 103 days, the emperor announced more than 200 edicts, until the Empress Dowager and her conservative court officials deposed the emperor, put him under house arrest on an island in the Forbidden City, and began to hunt for Kang and his followers. Kang and Liang Qichao escaped into exile in September 1898, Kang to Hong Kong and Liang to Japan, and began to plot how they could return the emperor to power and resume the reform program. With the Empress Dowager again in power, and the end of the 100 Days reforms on September 21, 1898, Kang was deemed a traitor and became China's most wanted man. 6 of Kang's reform compatriots were beheaded, and his family and followers were wanted for arrest. With a large reward for his head, Kang was trailed by assassins, leading him to sail the Pacific in April 1899 and land in Victoria, Canada. Kang's exile would last until December 1913, when he finally returned to China to bury his mother, who had died in Hong Kong earlier that year. Kang logged approximately 180,000 miles during his 15-year exile. His travels included all the European countries except Russia, where he was persona non grata, Morocco, Egypt, Turkey, and Palestine, India, Sikkim, and Ceylon, Burma, Malaya, Thailand, Straits Settlements, and the Netherlands Indies, Japan, and Hong Kong. Kang spent approximately 29 intermittent months between 1899 and 1907 visiting the North American countries of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Kang gave his first interview to a Canadian reporter who boarded the ship after it landed in Victoria. The reporter wrote, "When the steamer that brought him to America reached quarantine at William Head yesterday, he was on deck and everywhere asking questions, chiefly concerning the quarantine laws and a system. Then when the liner moved in from quarantine to the city, his interminable questioning was resumed. What was Victoria's population, its manner of municipal government, its facilities for policing and protecting against fires, its schools and hospital arrangements? Notably, in Kang's first few days in Canada, he visited the British Columbia Parliament, met the Mayor of Victoria, and inspected warships docked at a nearby naval base. But most significantly, Kang became immersed in the lives and concerns of local Chinese. Leading Chinese welcomed Kang on the night of his arrival, beginning a close relationship with men in Victoria and Vancouver, BC, who would adopt Kang's reform program as their own. They also succeeded in convincing Kang to advance their concerns as Chinese overseas, particularly to the discrimination and immigration restrictions they faced as Chinese. Kang's speeches in Chinese were met with enthusiasm, especially when the idea of a large overseas Chinese commercial corporation to invest in Chinese industrial development was mentioned. Although Kang sought to enter the United States, where he hoped to meet President McKinley and seek U.S. military help to return the emperor to power, his entrance was blocked by Chinese exclusion laws and the government's reluctance to risk a dangerous diplomatic and military confrontation with China by supporting Kang. Only 5 years later, did Kong succeed in gaining admission to the United States. From Montreal, Kong made a quick trip to England, where he failed to convince the British government to send troops to topple the Empress Dowager. Upon his return to British Columbia that summer, Kong realized that Chinese overseas were animated by the cause of China's reform, and like him saw great possibilities for a worldwide reform organization. The Baohuanghui, Protect the Emperor Society, was officially founded on July 20, 1899 in Victoria, with the goal of restoring the emperor so he could carry on reforms. The English name, Chinese Empire Reform Association, was suggested by the man who entertained Kong upon his arrival in Canada in April 1899, the immigration interpreter Li Mengjiu. Although the vision and overall style of the organization came from Kong, a group of Chinese merchants from Victoria and the Vancouver metropolitan area would largely determine its activities and spur its growth. Kong also summoned his contacts in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco to Vancouver, and sent emissaries from Canada to the U.S. to mobilize new local chapters in their cities and nearby areas. As the founding city, Victoria was where the first Baohuanghui president, Li Fuji, established the founding headquarters in 1905 above his shop, where he sold hats, embroidery, silk, and opium. The parapet reads, "The First Chinese Reform Association, 1905," and displays the crossed Baohuanghui and Qing dragon flags. The building was restored inside and out by its owner, Ian Sutherland, in the 2000s. Among the valuable artifacts in the Victoria building was a large carved plaque engraved in 1907 with the names of the Canadian Chinese donors to the building. We have identified 55 Baohuanghui chapters in Canada, 41 in British Columbia alone. The donors were from cities such as Calgary, Alberta, Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Toronto, Ontario, and many small towns in British Columbia such as Fraser, Sawmill, and Dog Creek. From the donor chapters on this plaque, we can see that a broad swath of the Chinese population in Canada supported the Reform Association. Small and medium-sized towns, such as the small mining town of Rossland, were home to sizable Chinese populations, almost all male, and already politicized by their membership in the anti-Qing secret society Zhigongtong, Qigongtong, or Chinese Freemasons. The first charter of the Baohuanghui was written by Kong in the summer of 1899. The goal was to form chapters throughout the world, publish newspapers for propaganda and education, and establish banks and other businesses to counter foreign control of China. The organization would be led by a president and vice president, who would be Kong Youwei and Liang Qichao, a headquarters in Asia to receive and distribute donations, and local chapters. At the chapter level, all positions were to be publicly elected. They were to hold weekly meetings with speeches, newspaper reading, group singing, and chapters were to communicate among themselves through picture posters, group letters, and telegrams. In 1899, there were already chapters in the US, Canada, Southeast Asia, Australia, and Japan. The organization would expand to Africa, Europe, and Latin America. In North America, merchants, miners, and laundry workers who might never have thought about the future beyond the fate of their families and villages were suddenly shocked into realizing that China's survival was in their hands. They were connected for the first time by the idea of the Chinese nation, not just to each other, but to their compatriots spread over the globe. Ian Sutherland is in this photograph standing at left, showing Evelyn Huda Hart, Norma Worden, Ben Bronson, and Robert Worden the contents of the battered tin box construction workers found in a structural post while restoring the Victoria building. It was a time capsule that contained items the founding Victoria members found significant. There were foreign postage stamps, a Baohuanghui membership badge, July 1905 issues of Baohangwei newspapers from San Francisco, like the Chinese World pictured here, Honolulu, New York City, and Hong Kong, and a colored sketch on an old envelope of the coat of arms for the parapet of the Victorian headquarters in the middle, below bottom middle. Sutherland used this sketch to restore the parapet to its original appearance as shown in the drawing on the right. These artifacts illustrate how the Baohangwei network was able to penetrate Chinese communities in North America through the creation of a strong organizational identity. Probably the most important vehicle were the newspapers, which included news of chapters far and wide, as well as the transnational political campaigns and editorials. Often crossed with the yellow Qing dragon flag, the Baohangwei flag appeared on association letterhead, membership badges, posters, and the parapet of the founding association building in Victoria. Descriptions of the flag and the symbolism of its stars and stripes have been found only in American newspaper coverage. The Baohangwei vice president, Liang Qichao, spent nearly a year in Canada and the United States in 1903, when the flag began to appear. Liang, far more than Kong, spoke about guiding principles for members, both in their personal and organizational roles, and what it meant to be a citizen. From the newspaper articles and Liang's writings, we describe the flag's meaning as possible. 3 stars. Education. A new nation could only come from individuals imbued with civic responsibility who regard state affairs as their own affairs, obey the law, and are devoted to acquiring knowledge of the world beyond China. Unity. Chinese must unite to gain the strength needed to save their country from being divided, instead of caring only about the well-being of themselves and their family. Equality. Within Chinese society, men and women and all social classes should be equal. Chinese as people should be treated equally with other nationalities, and on its own territory, China's sovereignty must be respected. The 2 stripes. Independence. Citizens must seize and protect their political rights, just as nations must assert their independence or sovereignty in a competitive world. And grouping, Huchuan, by which they meant association, consciousness of the state, nationalism. There is strength in groups of citizens gathering together for a common cause. From the group comes the nation. Tom Leung immigrated to the United States to join the Fu and Wing Herb Company in Southern California, founded by his cousin Tom Fu Yun in 1893. An immigration slot for Tom Leung had been planned well in advance, as the 1897 Fu and Wing Incorporation papers listed Tom Leung of Canton as a partner. Tom's 1899 entry into the United States was uneventful. He received a merchant's Section 6 certificate from the American Council in Guangzhou, took a ship from Hong Kong, and arrived in San Francisco sometime that summer. He was landed a few weeks later and went to his new home at Fu and Wing, 903 South Olive in Los Angeles. There his cousin taught him how to diagnose and prescribe herbal medicines to their mostly white American patients. Tom began to use Leung as his American surname in English, and his children became Leungs too. However, the Chinese characters from Tan Leung, show Tom as his surname. Thus I used Tom as his surname rather than Leung. In 1899, Tom began to organize the Los Angeles chapter of the Chinese Empire Reform Association and to receive instructions from Kong Yo-wei. Between 1899 and 1909, Tom Leung was involved with a broad range of organizing activities beyond Los Angeles. He was responsible for coordinating and funding association members studying abroad. He wrote newspaper articles for the party's papers in New York City and San Francisco, and arranged for the San Francisco newspaper to move to Los Angeles after the 1906 earthquake. Most fatefully, he oversaw the operation of a glamorous Chicago restaurant, King Joy-Lo, promising that it would be profitable enough to support students abroad. Kong kept in close touch with Tom Leung, writing him lengthy and sometimes confidential letters covering sensitive topics like Kong's desire to assassinate his rival, the revolutionary Sun Yat-sen. Tom Leung and Wang Bingwu, both born in 1875, were betrothed in 1893 when they were 18 years old. Their families lived on either side of the Longjiang or Dragon River at the confluence with the mighty West River. The area was called Gamjuk, Ganju, or Sweet Bamboo, and was in Sunduk, Shunda County, which shared the same Samyup Sani dialect as Kong's hometown in Nanhai. Both families had wealth, but Wang Bingwu's family excelled in business. They lived in a compound of 10 stone buildings, with each unit of the family living in a different building. Bingwu's grandfather was a tea exporter who lived in Shanghai with his concubines. Later, he started a chain of exchange houses in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. Her father was a shark fin dealer in Hong Kong. Even though Tom Leung's family was poor by Wang's standards, he was smart and good-looking, and his father was a high official, having passed the metropolitan examinations, Jinshi, in 1863. Probably most important, the Wangs envisioned an economic partnership with the more prestigious Toms that would complement their business acumen. Because of the deaths of Tom Leung's mother and father, the marriage was delayed until December 1897. In 1899, even though Bingwu was pregnant with their first child, Tom Leung prepared to leave for the U.S. The child's tragic death in 1901 sent Tom Leung back to China to persuade Wang Bingwu to come to Los Angeles with him. In May 1902, Tom and Wang set sail from Hong Kong. On board the SS Gaelic, Tom found a political compatriot and the only other Chinese man occupying first-class cabins on the ship, the 74-year-old reformer Yongwing Ronghong, who was returning to Hartford, Connecticut after many years in China. When they landed in San Francisco, Tom and his wife were detained for 5 days before being allowed on American soil. Yongwing was not so lucky. The passenger manifest reads, Yongwing, 74, Chinese minister at Washington between 1876 and 1882, naturalized at Hartford, Connecticut, October 30, 1852, escaped. Yongwing's American citizenship had been revoked after the Exclusion Act of 1882, but he managed to return to Hartford after an absence. Jung and Tong Liam would meet again on June 16, 1905, when they joined Kang Youwei in his first meeting with President Theodore Roosevelt to talk about the harsh treatment of Chinese, even someone with the status of Yongwing, and the impending Chinese boycott of American goods to protest this policy. Tom Leung was a significant figure in the Chinese Empire Reform Association in the United States, but before his large collection of documents was examined by scholars, Tom was known by Kong historians only for the bitter dispute with Kong in 1908 and 1909 over the King Joylo restaurant in Chicago, whose profits were to fund Bao Huanghui students abroad. Tom filled a scrapbook with 80 documents written between 1898 and 1926 that he considered to be official Bao Huanghui business, including printed or mimeographed group letters from other chapters and leaders such as Kong or Liang Qichao. Letters written to the Los Angeles chapter and transmissions of Kong's letters through Canadian Bao Huanghui leaders. A file box of more personal correspondence includes letters from Liang Qichao and about 50 Bao Huanghui members, including Xu Qin, Huang Xiaoming, Li Fuji, and Ye En, who are writing from throughout the world. Tom Leung's relatives also were among the letter writers. some of whom were involved in the reform movement or had investments in Bahuanghui businesses. Nearly 40 letters and poems from Kong, as well as correspondence Kong received while traveling with Tom Leung in the United States, illuminate the evolution of the Bahuanghui and Kong's changing perspective and strategies from 1899 to 1909, as well as the complex relationship of Kong to his disciple. Factionalism and corruption were to quickly erode Bahuanghui influence in the United States after 1908, and the letters illuminate the conflicts already rife in the association shortly after its 1899 founding. Because Tom Leung was so thorough in saving Bahuanghui correspondence relating to the King Joy-Lo dispute, he was able to compile what became a damning expose of Kong's autocratic management style and Bahuanghui financial mismanagement, which he published in 1909. Tom Leung's documents were found in the Los Angeles family home at 1619 West Pico in the 1950s, more than 20 years after Tom Leung's death in 1931. When Wang Bingwu suffered a stroke, she and her adult children moved to their new homes, leaving behind many items they could not read or find a use for. Luckily, my father, Arnold Larson, ex-husband of my mother, Louise Leung Larson, had long seen Tom Leung as an important historical figure. He went to the vacant building, now in a rundown neighborhood, and salvaged the letters and many other historical artifacts. He gave these materials to the Southwest Museum. After Arnold died in 1982, my mother claimed the items from the Southwest Museum, reclaimed the items, and asked her friend, UCLA professor Perry Link, to look over the Chinese language materials to see whether they had historical value. Link saw the collection included letters from Kong Yue and other Bahuanghui members, and then oversaw the indexing and initial analysis of the documents. Around 1985, my mother donated the Tom Leung collection to the UCLA Asian Library, then directed by James Chung. Chung provided me photocopies of the materials so I could have them translated as my mother was writing her memoir, Sweet Bamboo. Chung later provided microfilm of the collection to Fang Zhiqin, head of the Kongliang Study Society in Guangzhou, who, with his graduate student Cai Huiyao, transcribed the Bahuanghui-related materials and published them in a 1997 book, with a second edition in 2008. This book, Kong Liang and the Bahuanghui, the collected materials of Tom Leung in America, spurred research on the Bahuanghui in China among the most eminent Kong scholars. Because UCLA digitized the entire collection and made it freely available online, the materials are now better known in the United States. I oversaw the translation of the Tom Leung letters during the 1980s and 1990s, working with many scholars and local historians to understand the people and historical events described in the documents. From the beginning, a critical aid in this research was the 1972 dissertation by Robert Worden, a Chinese reformer in exile, the North American phase of the travels of Kong Yue, 1899 to 1909. Worden wrote this trailblazing study of Kong in North America in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the first doctoral-level scholar to thoroughly delve into a vast assortment of archival sources then available in North America to document Kong's activities. He consulted directly with 3 scholars having an intimate knowledge of Kong and his organization: Rong Bangluo, Kong's grandson, Gong Qianxiao, an eminent Kong scholar, and Him Lai, the Dean of Chinese American History, who was also my mentor. Robert's approach, integrating the history of modern China with the history of Chinese in North America, influenced my perspective as well. Thus, Robert and I were on the same page when we met in 2011 and teamed up to update the dissertation as a book, incorporating the many primary sources that had come to light since 1972. We invited 4 other scholars to collaborate with us, who contributed their special knowledge to make this book as authoritative as possible in covering such a vast topic as Kong and the Bahonghui in North America. University of Victoria historian Zhong Ping-chun is the foremost expert on Chinese reformers and revolutionaries in Canada, and author of Trans-Pacific Reform and Revolution, The Chinese in North America, 1898 to 1918. Evelyn Huda Hart, Brown University, is a renowned historian of the Chinese in Latin America. Chen Xuezhang of Guangzhou is a protege of Fang Zhiqian Institute of History at the Guangdong Academy of Social Sciences, and contributed his deep knowledge of the lives of Kong and his students. Yang Zheng, a PhD candidate in Chinese history at the University of Connecticut under Peter Zero, the leading American historian of Kong and Liang, served as expert translator and research assistant. This letter from the UCLA collection is written by both Kong, the portion on the right, writing on a page reads from top to bottom, right to left, and Liang Ingliu, who is working with Kong in Hong Kong and in close contact with various Bahonghui activists in North America. Kong's first message to Tom Liang is dated December 7, 1899, and reads in part, I arrived in Hong Kong from Canada in November and learned that you had left for America. People there have been longing for one of us to be there, like yearning for rain during a drought. Now that you are in the U.S., you can follow my orders to dispatch letters to all cities to reassure them that they are not alone, and encourage them to organize an association if they do not have one. Please keep me informed in a timely manner of the situation in all cities. We initiated the Bahonghui because China is at the edge of collapse. The overseas Chinese in America are so enthusiastic and stand on our side. This indicates heaven blesses us. You can encourage our fellow Cantonese in America in this way. As soon as they are organized, you can rest until there are further instructions. The survival of His Majesty is at stake. Kong signs his name Gongsheng, or Life Renewed, which he began calling himself after he escaped into exile. Liang Ingliu's letter is on the left on this sheet and updates Tom on events in China and gives many details on Bahonghui contacts in North America. In this second letter from Liang Ingliu, reviewed by Kong, who wrote circles next to the characters he wanted to emphasize, like underlining, it was clear that Los Angeles already had a Bahonghui chapter. Tom was encouraged to seek out educated Chinese who had studied Western languages, law, machinery, and the physical sciences. But Liang wrote, most important are political science, finance, and the military and naval sciences, and naval and military sciences, as there are no such people, and if there are no such people, then seek out the talented and intelligent and have them study these subjects in school. When the Bahonghui has ample funds, it will start to train a militia. New weapons are often invented there. We should know their names, what they are good for, how to ship them to China, and so forth. Please study them and write letters to tell us about them. Tom Liang would become active in supporting students and in developing the Western Military Academy, 2 major Bahonghui projects. Liang also instructs Tom to enlist secret society members to the cause, as they would be useful for dangerous missions. Knowing that Tom Liang was a poet and calligrapher, Liang chided him. You cannot only associate with friends with whom you write highbrow songs and compose stories. Some of the individuals Liang mentions in his 2 letters to Tom Liang would soon be in contact with Tom and send him their photos. Tom placed these photos in an album recently discovered in the home of Geraldine Leung Richards, daughter of Taft Liang, Tom Liang's eldest son. Jerry donated a large collection of Tom Liang's books to the UCLA Asian Library. Ye En, prominent merchant and interpreter for the Canadian Immigration Service, was a founder of the Bahonghui in 1899. That year, Ye championed the formation of a large overseas Chinese commercial corporation that would become an important activity of the Chinese Empire Reform Association. In 1900, he traveled to the United States to help mobilize new Bahuanghui chapters. Ye was first elected president of the Vancouver chapter, and in 1900 led the National Federation of Canadian Chapters. He would become active in the Bahuanghui Commercial Corporation businesses in Hong Kong and China, but fell out with Kong Yue over a business scandal in 1909. Li Fuji, on the left, was the first president of the Bahuanghui, chosen by Kong in 1899, even though Li did not volunteer for the job. He remained loyal to Kong throughout the most difficult times in 1909 and beyond, when others such as Ye Un dropped out of the Bahuanghui or joined Sun Yat-sen's revolutionaries. He and Dong Qiantai, on the right, were in close contact with Kong during his travels and prepared group letters that conveyed Kong's messages and were sent to chapters worldwide. This letter to Tom Leung expressed Li and Dong's frustration with raising consciousness and funds as follows. It is a pity that many people of the yellow race would rather become slaves of foreign countries than untie their purses to donate money to our cause. All of our military and political activities need money. It is not easy to raise funds. People inside China generally have a very narrow view. They look at the sky from the bottom of a well and are still sound asleep. This is understandable, but even those who are abroad, who have witnessed harsh treatment and many other abuses toward Chinese by foreigners, are still unconcerned about their emperor and their country, and even worse, are betraying their emperor. No wonder the country is in imminent danger. It's notable that Kong trusted these two men, who visibly lacked education and literary skills, according to translator Charles Liu, who remarked on this letter's awkward diction, strange grammar, and bad penmanship. Liang Yingliu emphasized the importance of inspiring businessmen like Tan Shubin, who's pictured here, to embrace the righteous Bahuanghui cause and presumably generously donate money to support its actions. Tom Leung met Tan Shubin when he first arrived in San Francisco in 1899. Tan, who was not related to Tom Leung, was also an herbalist, and their families became friends. As one of Kong's earliest supporters, he was also one of the earliest defectors to the revolutionaries in 1909. In spite of this very visible loss, the Bahuanghui newspaper in San Francisco remained a trusted source of news until 1969. As important as San Francisco was for the Bahuanghui, it hosted a women's association, military academy, and a newspaper, and likely had the largest membership of any chapter in the United States. Kong never visited the city. Kong did not feel he would be safe in San Francisco, where Sun Yat-sen had strong supporters among the Zhigongtong, or the Chinese Freemasons, including Wang Sam-duk, Huang San-de, who in his memoir disclosed that Sun had indeed asked him to assassinate Kong. Kong not only relied on Bahuanghui leaders who lived in North America, but also sent several deputies who were especially close to him as peripatetic organizers to establish chapters, deal with their problems, explore business opportunities, and raise funds. Liang Qitian was the first such Kong deputy to come to the Americas, arriving in Canada in March 1900. He was reported to be in Portland in July and San Francisco in August, before traveling widely in the United States. He went to Mexico sometime before June 1901 and probably visited countries in Central and South America before returning to the U.S. Liang made a second trip to Mexico, Central and South America in 1903, followed by a second tour of the United States. Liang Qitian was the cousin of the Bahuanghui vice president Liang Qichao, who at that time was making his own organizing trips to Hawaii and Australia. Liang Qitian kept in touch with Tom Liang and visited Los Angeles several times. And here is what he says on the back of his photo in the photo album. When I traveled to North America in the spring of 1900, I first changed into Western clothing. This photograph was taken in Vancouver, Canada. I hope that my fellow townsmen, upon seeing it, will not reproach me for losing my original character, that is, wearing Chinese clothes. On June 10, 1901, Liang Qitian wrote Tom Liang from Mexico, where he had traveled to 13 cities and was the first of Kong's disciples to meet the man who would be the most powerful leader in the Mexican Baohuanghui, Wang Fun-chuk of Torreon. Wang had immigrated to Mexico in 1883 via the United States in Kaiping, Guangdong. Evelyn Huda Hart, author of our book's chapter on the Baohuanghui in Latin America, describes Wang as a hard-charging, visionary, modern industrialist and an ardent early Baohuanghui promoter. By 1901, Wang was a highly successful businessman, managing hotels along the railroad line near the border with the U.S. Liang Qitian was especially impressed by Wang's new Guangdong Garden, a large urban agricultural enterprise, and the rapidly increasing value of land in Torreon. Kong Yue followed closely the reports of his deputies about the enormous promise of business profits in Mexico for ventures proposed by Wang and his compatriots, including buying and selling real estate in quick succession to make fast profits and using these profits to establish a bank, shipping silver bullion to China, as silver was imported from Mexico and to use for Chinese currency, the tael or liang, and also building streetcar lines in Torreon and a steamship line from Mexico to China. Kong spent many months in Mexico between 1905 and 1907, becoming obsessed with deal-making, which would come to a crashing halt with the worldwide economic crisis that began at the end of 1907. Tom founded the Los Angeles Reform Association in 1899 and was its first president. This article from 1904 announces the new headquarters at 417 North Los Angeles Street. While Tom Liang opened the dinner by reading a poem, Liang Qitian gave the dedication speech, which was translated into English by George Lamb. The Los Angeles Times describes Kong as both a scholar and a fighter, diminutive but with an intense personality, and wearing a frock coat covered with gold medals presented to him by Baohuanghui chapters he had visited. The article says the Los Angeles chapter had already had 1,200 members. But if this was true, the chapter must have served all of Los Angeles County, or even the broader Southern California region, because a 1905 census of Chinese showed only 2,800 Chinese in Los Angeles County, and only 800 in the city proper. Another honored guest at the banquet was Homer Lee, the American who founded the association's Western Military Academy, which hired U.S. Army veterans and National Guard members to teach military skills to Baohuanghui activists. In Los Angeles, Liang Qitian worked with Tom Liang's wife, Wang Bingwu, as she was organizing a branch of the Chinese Empire Women's Reform Association. He sent the new branch a letter of congratulations. In this letter, he is writing both Tom and Wang to describe his experiences immediately after leaving Los Angeles, when he visited Marysville, the third largest Chinese community in California, to dedicate their chapter building. He was met at the train station by 10 horse carriages and a marching band, greeted by members wearing Baohuanghui badges. Yet even with such a warm welcome, Liang was concerned that the prospect for a strong chapter was not as good, as he assessed the financial situation of the town as very poor. Clearly, fundraising potential was much on Liang's mind as he promoted the Baohuanghui. During this time, Liang was also working with Tom Liang and others to establish the business arm of the organization, the commercial corporation, or 商务公司, and in another letter from January 1904, asked Tom's help in formulating the procedures and rules for selling shares to members. He wrote, "If we take advantage of the current enthusiasm everyone has and accomplish our goal, the task in Mexico will be more likely to succeed." Here Leung is referring to the potential for Bahuanghui-run businesses in Mexico that were thought to hold the most promise for quick profits. The Bahuanghui Commercial Corporation, envisioned by Kong as a Chinese East Asia company, would become a worldwide business network encompassing banks, newspapers and publishing companies, restaurants and hotels, agricultural commodity and natural resources companies, and railroads, streetcars, and steamships. We devote a long chapter to the commercial corporation and present the King Joy-Lo restaurant in Chicago as a case study. Bahuanghui Vice President Liang Qichao toured Canada and the U.S. for 9 months in 1903. By the time he arrived in British Columbia on March 3rd, Liang had traveled on behalf of the Bahuanghui in Japan, Hawaii, Hong Kong, Singapore, Ceylon, Australia, and the Philippine Islands. In these travels, he founded new chapters, established or bolstered newspapers and schools, founded publishing and translation businesses, raised funds and promoted commercial corporation shares, as well as built the symbolic and structural bones of the Bahuanghui. Crossing Canada, Liang went to New York, Boston, and Washington, where he met with Secretary of State John Hay and President Theodore Roosevelt, and then toured the western and the northwestern United States, ending his journey in California in October. Liang not only went to major cities in the United States, but made a point of reaching the Chinese population of such localities as rural Idaho and many small towns in the Pacific Northwest. Liang was well known for a series of essays he wrote entitled 新民说, The New Citizen, for the Bahuanghui Yokohama newspaper. In one essay he wrote, "Look at how fewer than 10,000 British people live in India today, while they have tamed 200 million Indians to be as obedient as a flock of sheep." Liang argued that this national power stemmed from self-disciplined, orderly individuals able to formulate and obey both rules governing themselves and laws governing their schools, communities, provinces, and nations. From such self-governance, Kong claimed, a country of complete and perfect liberty, equality, independence, and autonomy will be created, and perhaps more crucially, with the strength to resist foreign intervention. Chinese citizens needed to look to themselves and take responsibility for their nation, rather than vainly hope for wise rulers and ministers to emerge and guide China. Here, pictured in Portland, Oregon, in September 1903, Liang Qichao has been joined by his younger brother, on the right, seated on the right, Liang Qi-sun, who was studying in Chicago. This photo belonged to Kong's second daughter, Kong Tung-bi, who had just arrived in the United States from Canada and joined Liang's traveling party in Seattle. Tung-bi spent about 3 weeks traveling with the Liang brothers, and then Liang Qi-sun escorted her east to Hartford, Connecticut, where Yongwing arranged for her housing and education. Tung-bi had founded the Chinese Empire Ladies Reform Association, Bahong Yi Hui, soon after she arrived in Canada, with new American branches forming throughout 1903. Liang Qichao was Tom Liang's classmate from Kong's Guangzhou school. Liang visited Los Angeles in October 1903. Tom's wife, Wang Bingwu, later told her daughter that when Liang arrived at the Tom home, the two men lay on the bed and talked all night, with Wang bringing them fried eggs and rice for dinner. Liang was so popular a figure that no hall was large enough to accommodate the crowds who wanted to greet him. Thus, Tom and others petitioned the Los Angeles police for permission to hold an outdoor meeting on Apablaza Street. During his stay, hundreds attended a reception for Leung at the Chamber of Commerce, with Los Angeles Mayor Meredith Snyder among the local dignitaries in attendance, as well as many Chinese merchants, including Tom Leung. Liang Qichao drafted a charter for the Los Angeles chapter, which clearly laid out the goals and priorities for its members and became a model charter for other chapters. It read, "This association aims to save China. The efforts of each of the 400 million Chinese people must be combined in order to carry out the Emperor's 1898 reforms. The purpose of this association is to establish a constitutional government. After the constitutional government is established, we will form a large political party that will always exert itself in the affairs of the nation." In the charter, Leung mandates 4 activities. Dispatch our members on speaking tours to promote the principles of our association. Raise funds to establish schools and support our association's youth to go abroad to study so that they will become useful talents for the future. Devise means to strengthen businesses in order to recover our economic rights. Cultivate the military qualifications of citizens, or guomin, in order to defend the country when it is in trouble. The origins of the Western Military Academy can be traced to Liang Qichao's visit to Los Angeles in October 1903, when Homer Lee enhanced his martial aura with the reformers by meeting Leung at the train station, surrounded by several high-ranking American military officers. He then joined Leung in the first of 16 carriages, escorted by a National Guard Signal Corps mounted detail and military band. Leung was greatly impressed with Major General Lee, as he called himself, whom he described in his trip journal as enthusiastic about China and the nephew of General Robert E. Lee, a frequently repeated falsehood that Lee never corrected. Tom Leung had met Lee in 1900 and helped recruit this 23-year-old Stanford student to the reform cause. Lee, although physically unfit for military duty, he had been crippled since childhood and weighed only 100 pounds, yearned to see his theories of military and political science activated. And the Chinese served his purpose well. By March 1900, he had sought out Ba Honghui leaders Tom Leung in Los Angeles and Tom Shibin in San Francisco and impressed them with his military expertise and willingness to travel to China to train Chinese troops and lead them in restoring the emperor. In our chapter on Ba Honghui uprisings, assassination plots, and the Western Military Academy, we described the Ba Honghui funded and organized August 1900 uprising to reinstate Guangxu, which Lee sought to lead. Funds were raised for Lee to travel to Asia to meet Kong and take part in the uprising then being planned. Lee played no role in the uprising, which failed, but Lee returned to the U.S. and remained close to Ba Honghui leaders so that he had a key role in hosting Liang Qichao in 1903. In his 1903 Los Angeles charter, Leung had mandated activities to cultivate the military qualifications of citizens, a clear reference to the academy, which was founded early in 1904 in Los Angeles to Kong's acclaim. In its heyday in 1905, there were branches in more than 30 American cities. The headquarters was in Los Angeles, where the school was incorporated as the Western Military Academy. The photo in this slide shows drilling cadets at Sunset Boulevard and Vermont Avenue in August 1904, and they would march in the Rose Parade in 1905. Our book describes how Kong and the Ba Honghui saw the Western Military Academy as a school, with the Chinese name Gancheng Xue Xiao, translated as Shield and Rampart School. However, Americans like Homer Lee described the school as a Chinese reform army, calling the instructors officers. The Western Military Academy was strongly supported by Ba Honghui chapters and likely would have continued if the U.S. government and the governors of California and New York had not grown suspicious that the Ba Honghui was violating international neutrality laws by training troops on American soil with the intention of overthrowing a foreign government. Thus Kong had to dismiss Li and disband the Western Military Academy in 1906. After many attempts to enter the United States since 1899, Kong was issued a critical Section 6 certificate on the basis of residency in Canada under Article 3 of the Treaty of 1894, and his status as a teacher, author, and journalist who intended, in quotes, to visit the United States as a tourist for curiosity or pleasure, unquote. The Canadian residency tax had failed to persuade U.S. officials to accept Kong's Section 6 compliance in 1899, but now in 1904, his latest attempt was successful and bypassed the officials in Washington as he prepared to come to the United States. U.S. Consul Edwin Dudley in Vancouver had long been sympathetic to admitting Kong, and now he not only arranged for the document below, but wrote letters of introduction to U.S. Secretary of State John Hay and others, writing, "His Excellency is a tourist within the meaning of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and therefore entitled to enter the United States. But he is more than this. He is at the head of a great movement for the uplifting of his people, and I shall feel personally obliged for any courtesy you may show His Excellency and the gentlemen who accompany him." Kong kept this duplicate of the original documents, which are in the Seattle National Archives, through his entire exile, and they are now in his residential museum in Qingdao, China. As Kong prepared to enter the United States, he wrote Tom Leung, "I have just entered Canada and will soon be in the U.S. We will see each other soon. You can tell me everything about Los Angeles. When I tour places, I will definitely visit their factories, government agencies, and schools, because these are very important. I would like to have a disciple or close relative accompany me, so that I can trust a lot of things to that person in the future. Do you wish to tour with me? Send me a telegram if you do." In a postscript, Kong made an unusual request. "In the United States, there is the opposition party, 反对党, the revolutionaries. We can take President McKinley as an example. He was assassinated in public at the Pan American Exposition in 1901. Many of our comrades are worried. I heard that in San Francisco there are catapults or slingshots and bronze armor, as well as other protective wear made of hair and paper. Please purchase them on my behalf. Be sure to try them out with a gun before you buy. Keep them at your place and keep this a secret until I notify you that I've arrived in America, and then mail them to me." Lightweight armor made of paper and hair was used in ancient China, so Kong must be suggesting Tom procure it in San Francisco's well-supplied Chinatown. Tom apparently was unwilling or unable to carry out this mission for Kong, but Kong had given the same task to his daughter Tung Bi, who carried it out in New York City. Sun Yat-sen had been traveling through the U.S. in 1904, and Bao Huanghui leaders had told Kong that Sun had made a great impression on some of their members. Kong became convinced that Sun was a mortal danger to him, and he wrote his daughter as well as leaders in the U.S., asking them to assassinate Sun first before he arrived in the U.S. Oh Jia was an important Kong disciple with expertise in military education. In 1904, he was traveling through the U.S. to organize branches of the Western Military Academy. Kong also deputized O with assessing volunteer assassins of Sun Yat-sen, who was in the U.S. throughout much of 1904. O wrote Kong's daughter Tung Bi, "The decision to remove the thief, Sun, is certain, but it is hard to find the right person. Chen Yue-sung has volunteered to do it, but when we traveled together, I found that he is just an inexperienced scholar. Right now, someone in New York has also volunteered. I haven't met him, so have no way to know whether he can do it." Kong's preoccupation with assassinating Sun, who departed the U.S. in December 1904, reemerged after he entered the U.S. himself and heard rumors that Sun would soon return. The Kongtung South Windsor papers, a cache of letters we found in 2013, revealed the extent of Kong's fears, which even went so far as suggesting his daughter take a leading role in an assassination plot of his own imagining. Kong and his disciples, including Liang Qichao, had long sought assassins for their Qing enemies, namely the Empress Dowager and several of her powerful allies, but over and over again would be disappointed when the would-be assassin was discovered and executed, or in the case of a young woman who lived for several years with Tom Leung, backed out of the plot. Kong delayed his departure from Canada until February 1905 because of a lingering case of bronchitis. He arrived in Los Angeles on March 15th, eager to rest in the home Tom Leung rented for Kong and his retinue across from Westlake Park, now MacArthur Park. This allowed Kong to enjoy some pleasures of nature, even if he could not escape from the prying eyes of the American press or the building crisis over Chinese exclusion. Kong wrote several versions of the poem below, which reads, "My old home near Westlake should stand as before, yet its hallways will echo my footsteps no more. I still remember the spring blossoms and bright moonlit sky. Every day leaning on my cane, I watch the rippling waves on the lake." We devote a chapter in the book to Kong's 2 months in Los Angeles and his disciple, Tom Leung. Kong praised Los Angeles over all other cities in the United States. This longer version of the previous poem was written toward the end of his 1905 U.S. tour while Kong was visiting Yellowstone Park. He found Yellowstone boring, complaining of the mountains that were treeless, the rocks that were wizened yellow in color, and the heat that made the place feel like a boiler. He wrote, "Flat are the great plains of America, where there is little good scenery to see. Of the whole land that I have traveled, Los Angeles is the most excellent. Close to the ocean and the mountains, it is neither too hot nor too cold. Many are the flowers and various the fruits, and all the houses and buildings are newly repaired. Big as one's fists are the fragrant oranges which are sold throughout America." For 2 months in spring I had a short sojourn here, recuperating and forgetting the worries of one in exile. On the East Coast there is only Hartford, where the groves and houses can be compared to those in Los Angeles. Yet there are no hills, and I am afraid of the cold. It is not a good haven for me. There was more to Kong's appreciation of Los Angeles that fit into his emerging theory that what China needed most was mastery of science and technology and the empirical approach to the world that this required. Kong saw Los Angeles as a prime example of Western material or industrial civilization, and gave it prominence in an essay he wrote on the topic, whose preface was composed in Los Angeles. Kong conceived of a social evolutionary progression measured by the level of a country's material advancement, more pertinent to a nation's power in the world than the greatness of its philosophy or religion. And in Los Angeles, Kong also saw the potential for human happiness to be generated by, in quotes, material civilization. The steam engine not only powered gunboats, but steamships, locomotives, factories, electricity generating stations, and the automobile, and were the keys to creating a utopian environment where people could enjoy urban affluence close to nature. Kong is famous for writing the first Chinese utopia, Da Tong Shu, or the Book of Great Community, laying out an egalitarian world in which there would be no nations, a shared language, equality of men and women, and a comfortable life focused on pursuing happiness. This photo shows 2 members of the Los Angeles chapter, George Lem and Tom Leung on the left. Ben O-young was a leader of the Fresno chapter, which Kong had visited on his way to Los Angeles. Young, O-young Xianzhou, escorted Kong during much of his U.S. tour, perhaps as something of a bodyguard, as Young was an instructor in the Fresno Western Military Academy. Young and his wife would also become the matchmakers for the 1907 wedding of Kong with a young woman, Lily Ha, He Zhanli, who had attended Kong's speech in Fresno in 1905 and would be his third wife. On the right in the photo is Zhou Guoxian, a Malaysian Chinese Kong first met in 1903, and whose command of English and comfort speaking on Kong's behalf to the press won him the role of Kong's secretary and interpreter in Europe and the United States from 1904 to 1907. The Los Angeles chapter had great ambitions. Only a year after their move to North Los Angeles Street, they took a 40-year lease from the Sepulveda family for this two-story building on Apablaza Street. The first floor was devoted to profit-making, retail stores, and a bathhouse, the second to offices, a model schoolroom for the association's Chinese language school, and a capacious 3,750 square foot meeting and lecture hall that doubled as a drill hall for the Western Military Academy. Wang Bingwu told her daughter, Louise Leung Larson, that Tom Leung invested $1,000 in this building. And last and greatest of these wonders, wrote the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Chinese propose to lift their womenfolk to a higher educational plane and will actually encourage the club idea among Chinese maids and dames. This women's association branch was founded by Wang Bingwu, who in December 1904 was the first Chinese woman to make a public speech in Los Angeles on how Chinese women should be taught to read and write, and their husbands should not be allowed to take concubines. The Times had more news. Within the next month, one of the most talented Chinese women in America will visit Los Angeles at the invitation of the Chinese Empire Reform Association and will lecture to Chinese women exclusively in the new hall on Apablaza Street. The Honorable Miss Sit Tin Ting Kum, lecturer and reformer of note, will address the Los Angeles Chinese women and endeavor to stir them up to emulate their white-skinned sisters of clubdom. This woman was Xue Jinqin, who would live in the Tom Leung home from 1905 to 1908 while she attended high school and serve as nanny for my mother and her older sister Lily, and became a close friend of Wang Bingwu. A feminist like Wang, she was a much more public figure. In 1901, when Xue was only 17, she made headlines as the first Chinese woman to make a public speech at a protest against Russian occupation of Manchuria in the famous Zhangyuan Park in Shanghai. Dubbed China's Joan of Arc by American newspapers, Xue arrived in San Francisco in October 1902, where she again was the first Chinese woman to speak publicly in the city. After Kong Tongbi came to the U.S. in 1903, Xue made contact with Tongbi and founded a branch of the Women's Association in San Francisco. From her poem, one can see that Xue Jinqin saw herself in the heroic terms of a knight-errant, forging ahead with sword in hand and a fate that could end her life. It is likely that when Xue came to the United States, she already had the ambition to obtain a Western education and return to China to wield her sword against the Empress Dowager. By 1905, when Kong first met her in Portland, Oregon, the assassination of Cixi was clearly what he intended for her to do, and he funded her education on that basis, as is shown in correspondence saved by Tom Leung, who was in charge of dispersing funds to Ba Huanghui-supported students. Both Tom and Kong found Xue a compelling personality, and Wang Bingwu, who was aware of the assassination plan, described her as da-dan or di-dam, or courageous to the point of boldness. Few members knew about her mission, and in the Tom Leung paper she is referred to by an alias, Wu Shi, or 50. Wu Shi probably invokes the Tong poem, The Gorgeous Zither, whose title, Jin Si, or Zither, is a homographic pun for her name, Jin Qin. The poem contains this stanza. For no reason, the gorgeous zither has 50 strings. Each string, each fret recalls a youthful year. However, Xue eventually sought a much less dramatic future, as explained by Tom Leung to another Bahuangwei member in 1908. The reason we supported Wu Shi financially was that we wanted her to get into Beijing as an assassin. The teacher urged her to go to Beijing, and she said, "My studies are not finished, and I have an old mother to attend to. Therefore, I'm not able to go now." I told the teacher the truth. The teacher instructed me to stop financial support. Xue would go on to college in the Midwest and earn chemistry and early childhood education degrees, not moving back to China until 1914. Wang Yap, Huang Xi, was the representative of Guangdong and Guangxi provinces at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and when his responsibilities at the fair had ended, he came to Los Angeles to be with his relatives. Wang's father had informed Tom Leung in a letter that is part of the UCLA collection that he had spent several thousand taels for my son to purchase an official title from the government so that he could take the official position at the World's Fair. Wang Yap was Wang Bingwu's cousin, and he lived with the family from October 1904 to April 1905. His presence caught the attention of the local press, beginning with Wang Yap's attendance at the 1905 Rose Parade with Homer Lee. It was speculated that he had come to cast the imperial eye over the Western Military Academy. Wang sought out the press and even visited the Los Angeles Times office, generating this article about his planned book, What a Traveler Sees in America. Wang Bingwu is photographed holding her daughter Lily, while decrying the practice of foot binding, the reporter noting her hopelessly deformed bound feet. Tom Leung is described as a great reformer, much like Wang Yap. In March 1905, Wang Yap attended the welcome dinner for Kong Yo-wei. The Los Angeles Times reported that Wang's tribute to Kong praised him as the greatest light in the Chinese world today. He has the courage and resolution that would not be daunted by the presence of death. That he be recalled is the prayer and hope of China. Soon, Wang Yap again made the news, this time for his near arrest by immigration agents at Tom Leung's home. China's World Fair delegates had been subjected to 61 special rules restricting their entry and movements in the United States. American immigration inspectors aggressively enforced rules, being especially vigilant when the Chinese fair participants landed on American soil, and again when the fair was over. Chinese Inspector J.H. Jenkins of Los Angeles suspected Wang Yap of being one of the Chinese workmen who had made his escape from the St. Louis Fair. Jenkins encountered Tom Leung and his American secretary at the Fu and Wing Herb Company when he arrived at 903 South Olive Street at 10 in the morning on March 21st. Wang was still in bed and refused to be interviewed until he had dressed, brushed his teeth, and washed his face. He then answered only the most cursory of questions about his identity, declining to show his papers to an official of such insufficient rank as Jenkins, stating that if we wished any information about him, to telegraph to the Chinese minister in Washington and to the Department of Commerce and Labor for some person of high authority and rank to come here and interview him. Jenkins returned in the afternoon and found Wang Yap with Tom Leung and George Lem, who spoke English. Wang again refused to defer to Jenkins, saying he had a letter from the Chinese government to the President of the United States and would only show it to the President. Lem then told Jenkins that he had no right to interfere with anybody except laundrymen and laborers on gardens. Jenkins countered that Wang just better go down here to the U.S. Attorney's office with me, and he, the U.S. Attorney, Louis H. Valentine, is a big enough man in the government service. Tom Leung intervened, telling the inspector, "This is my house and you have no right to come up here." Wang ended up going to Valentine's office to show his papers, but in the meantime, Jenkins had heard from the Commissioner of Immigration in San Francisco, who said Wang had entered legally in April 1904 and as an official of the Chinese government and should not be molested. Wang declared he would attempt to get damages from the U.S. Department of State and soon after left for San Francisco. The LA papers covered the confrontation avidly, and in the June article, Los Angeles Bull and Chinese Club declared that Wang's arrest was the direct means of bringing about the threat of a boycott of all American goods in China, the problem that the president is laboring with, because Wang Yap straight away sent over an edict and put the grand kibosh on American goods therein. This sensationalistic commentary also remarked that Homer Lee, Kong Yue, and half a dozen Los Angeles Chinese, including Dr. Tom Long, have been called quietly to Washington on the case. Indeed, Kong must have been disquieted by witnessing Wang Yap's experience as a Qing official, humiliated by the American exclusion system, yet daring to resist his inquisitors. In short order, Kong became a highly effective campaigner against the Chinese exclusion policy, arousing his compatriots to take mass action and convincing empathetic Americans that exclusion was not only unfair, but potentially harmful to U.S.-China trade. Kong's power came from the weight of his organization and its role in the 1905 anti-American boycott. We devote a full chapter in our book to the Ba Huanghui responses to exclusion. Spring 1905 was a tense time for Chinese in the U.S., with pressure building on China to renew an expired 1904 treaty with the U.S. that would require China to assent to the U.S. prohibition of Chinese laborers from entering the U.S. The Chinese envoy to the U.S., Liang Cheng, had been attempting to soften the language in the treaty in negotiations with the U.S., but by April 30th he had realized that the U.S. would not back down. Liang made a public announcement which was posted in American Chinatowns. The Chinese Exclusion Act is increasingly severe over and above what it was originally. The oppression, indignity, and general disquietude resulting therefrom are being daily aggravated. As your minister, I can no longer bear to see our people unjustly suffering inequities and indignities visited continually upon them, as people who cry but cry in vain. In Los Angeles, Kong took action. He sent an urgent telegram to Liang Qichao in Yokohama, the editors of Shibao in Shanghai, and other groups of activists in Hong Kong and elsewhere. Kong explained that Liang Cheng had refused to sign the treaty that the U.S. had drafted, and now a new American envoy was on his way to Beijing to pressure the Qing Foreign Ministry to sign. Kong said that China would fall into great disorder if laborers were completely cut off from the U.S., where they had been earning money to send back home. And he wrote, "This is a matter of life or death. I hope you can organize a rally and urge everyone to send telegrams to our government and to provincial governors, appealing for help. At the same time, we should use newspapers to arouse popular sentiment. We may succeed in remedying the situation." The telegram had an immediate effect, as Liang Qichao explained in this June public letter to Ba Huanghui members that described how he and Ba Huanghui supporters in China and Hong Kong had responded. In Shanghai, the Ba Huanghui newspaper Shibao published Kong's telegram and wrote articles daily to educate its many readers about the exclusion crisis. A boycott of American products had been proposed in 1903 by the editor of the Ba Huanghui newspaper in Honolulu, and Liang felt that now was the time to act on this idea. It was thus no coincidence that Shibao's editors met with leaders of the Shanghai Chamber of Commerce, which on May 10th declared there would be a boycott against American goods to protest harsh policies against Chinese immigration. With Bao Hongwei businesses gearing up in 1905, Tom conceived of an entrepreneurial notion to support students. He proposed a scheme to keep to Kong during their travels across the United States and began to implement it after they bade farewell in Portland, Oregon in October 1905. Tom's pitch to start an upscale restaurant whose profits would support Bao Hongwei's students abroad was not as far-fetched as it sounds. The commercial corporation, the profits of which were to fund Bao Hongwei non-business activities, included hotels in Hong Kong. Tom had no experience running restaurants, but he did know how to cater to Americans willing to pay well to enjoy elegantly presented Chinese cultural offerings. Kong provided the initial investment and blessed the project, which was largely funded by the Hawaii Bank in New York and investments by individual members. Tom had held $35,000 in shares, a large part coming from Tom's and Wong's in Gamjuk. Tom also arranged for Wong Yap to purchase and ship at least $10,000 worth of elaborate teak carvings, a miniature Chinese theater, and other luxurious decorations. King Joilo opened in December 1906 in Chicago's Theater District and was incorporated with $100,000 in shares, 5 times more than any other Chinese restaurant in Chicago. Tom was in charge of selling shares and distributing funds to support students, while Bao Hongwei members in Chicago managed the restaurant. But from the beginning, infusions of funds from Hawaii Bank that Kong saw as loans, Tom took to be investments. Before Tom Leung's document collection was discovered in 1982, historians knew him only as one of the main culprits provoking Kong's lament to Liang Qichao in March 1908. Our great enterprise is now almost ruined by a few men. Sometime during winter 1907-1908, when Kong was in Europe, Kong began referring to Tom Leung as Thief Tom, Tan Zhe, and accused him of appropriating $160,000 yuan, probably 80,000 US, meant for King Joilo. The UCLA collection has few letters relating to the King Joilo scandal, one being the August 1908 letter here. In this letter, Kong ascribes his fury to the combination of severe financial demands from other businesses and his once boundless trust in Tom, which, when seeded by suspicions of wrongdoing, turned to equally boundless mistrust. He wrote, "In short, the entire unworthy matter resulted from my excessive suspicions. It started because you did not settle accounts in clear terms. At the same time, things got complicated because of the unsuccessful deals in both Hong Kong and Mexico, and caused you misfortune too. Now that everything is over, let bygones be bygones." This last surviving letter from Kong to Tom Leung represented a temporary ceasefire at best. By late 1908, Kong's forbearance toward Tom reverted to repudiation. The Guangxu Emperor had died, membership fees and donations had dried up, and the commercial corporation businesses were in deep trouble. In January 1909, Tom Leung published a 19-page booklet titled Zheng Xin Lu, or Report on Financial Management, that he sent to all chapters to clear his name in the wake of his shame and humiliation, in quotes, at the hand of outsiders who did not understand King Joilo's real situation and spread rumors that mixed lies with truth. In his defense, he provided an accounting of revenues and expenses, transcribed correspondence from Kong and others dealing with King Joilo, and reproduced the original letters from Kong as proof. Few people sympathized with Tom Leung openly, but Zheng Xin Lu stoked doubts and confusion about Kong's autocratic behavior and chaotic business practices. In the United States, where Tom was well known, the publication compounded the crisis of confidence among the members, arising from other business conflicts involving Kong and Canadian leaders. This booklet is not in the UCLA collection, but part of a large UC Berkeley collection of Baohuanghui official documents saved by Wu Xianze, one of the last Baohuanghui leaders who took the role as organizational historian and was active until 1951. However, among the items salvaged from the Pico Street home by Arnold Larson was a woodblock for the reproduction of one of Kong's letters in Zhengxinlu. As a consequence of this scandal, Tom Leung's involvement in the Baohuanghui ended in 1909, and there were no further letters from Kong. However, in 1921, Tom returned to China for a long visit and reportedly paid a call on Kong in Shanghai. According to Wang Bingwu's recollections, he found Kong quite poor and, as in the old days, gave his teacher money. In 1927, Tom wrote the Shijie Ribao, Chinese World newspaper in San Francisco, suggesting they organize a joint celebration of Kong's 70th birthday in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Tom wrote again in February, asking for Kong's address in Shanghai, because I wish to send over a birthday present. Kong's last birthday was celebrated on March 9, 1927. He died in Qingdao on March 31st. Our book concludes with 2 chapters covering the period 1906 to 1911, years of tumult and transition, and finally, revolution. In March 1907, the Protect the Emperor Society changed its name to the Constitutional Association, or Xianzhanghui. It was thought the emperor no longer needed protecting, as China under the Empress Dowager had begun to transition to a constitutional monarchy. Kong presided over a plenary session of organizational leaders, including Tom Leung, who represented Los Angeles, and a new charter was discussed and adopted. Article 4 of the charter lays out what could be the principles of a national constitution. It reads in part, "The people are the basis of the nation. Constitutionalism entails popular rights and public discussion. We must strive to expand our citizens' rights by forming a parliament so we can participate in governing our country." Soon, more than 200 Xianzhanghui chapters signed a radical constitutional petition written by Kong that galvanized constitutionalists inside China and outraged the Qing court. 1906 to 1911 saw the political influence of Kong and his Chinese Empire Reform Association reach a pinnacle inside China while reeling abroad under commercial corporation collapses, the suspicious death of the Guangxu Emperor, and the rise of their revolutionary challengers. Association members abroad defected to Sun Yat-sen's Chongmenghui as the reformers inside China lost confidence in the Qing government's ability to meet their demands for change. By the autumn of 1911, the political tide had turned, led not by revolutionaries, but by frustrated reformers no longer willing to wait to exercise their sovereignty. The Qing dynasty lost its mandate to govern, and the Republic of China was founded. In our book, we contend that Kong's most potent contribution to the Chinese polity was his success in rousing Chinese at home and abroad to care about their country's political future and to act with others to further their goals in a constructive way. Between 1899 and 1909, Kong was the first Chinese leader to assemble a massive political association and oversee its growth in popularity. This was only possible abroad, because such organizations were forbidden in China. Unlike the revolutionaries who appealed viscerally to anti-Manchu identity politics, Kong and the Baohuanghui propagated basic ideas of constitutionalism, citizen participation, a balance of power, cosmopolitan nationalism, and representative government. That Kong and his followers failed to accomplish their goals should not diminish the magnitude of their ambitions and accomplishments. China, with the exception of Taiwan in recent decades, has never institutionalized the competitive, constitutional, and representative political system, bolstered by independent citizen organizations, strong political parties, and a free press. This 1902 public letter sent by the Philadelphia chapter was one of many in the Tom Leung collection to express their solidarity with other chapters, a small example of the political awakening that Kong and his organization inspired. It read, "We should communicate with each other and take advantage of what we learn about governmental systems. If a small country, America, can do this, why shouldn't it work for people from a large country? When I see Independence Hall, I'm moved, and want to move it to our imperial capital. When I hear the Liberty Bell, I'm touched and want to ring the bell to wake our spirits. Now that I've heard the news of the Righteous Association, my soul and spirit have begun to rest."